Welcome to Emotionally Correct, a hilarious DEIA podcast with Kelton and Cherise from EIDEIA. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you? The sun has come up on a new America. How do you feel?
Well, maybe we should start with something lighter.
I don't know
I appreciate
that.
Yeah. This is a special edition of Emotionally Correct.
I like that. And you didn't tell me it was the special edition. I would have dressed appropriately, but yeah, special edition. I can get with that.
Yeah. So this is our post-election conversation. It's Friday. The election was Tuesday evening, just for perspective. And you and I have not had a actual dialogue about the election.
No, we have not.
And so I don't think I should go first. I think,
I was about to say you should go first.
Here's what I guess I do want to say, from the outset, is that I feel like it is important for the work that we are trying to do together on supporting people's sort of mental health, social, emotional competencies, and what that means in sort of the march towards equity. I do feel like it's important to be able to hold a lot of things at the same time. And so I'm excited to have this conversation because I think a lot of people they've decided why Tuesday went the way it did, as if there's one answer. And a lot of folks obviously come to that answer based on what's important to them and what they think was important or not important to other people. So I think this is going to be a challenging dialogue because I've noticed for myself, and I feel good about this in some ways, the first time Trump won, I was so sure that there was one reason, and I was really angry. And this, I don't even know if cancer culture was like the phrase back then in 2016, but I remember sort of dismissing completely any of the motivations people might have had for voting for Trump as being whatever. I had a lot of judgment about it. But here we are 8 years later, and I do think that what I want to try to do is consider why people voted for Trump and what that meant for them. And I think we ignore the reasons why people voted for Trump at our peril, because it was more than half the country. So we can't cancel everybody and we've talked at EIDEIA about this component of belonging as an important thing. Like it has to be, we have to find a way to not dehumanize or other people while we're pretending like we're trying to be so inclusive and diverse and equitable, except for those people. But see, that's not the paradigm and the philosophy that I think we are using to start this little effort of ours. And so I know that's a long prologue, but that's where I'm starting in this conversation, is like I'm really interested in just having like a winding conversation about what we think this means. I know it hurts, but what does it mean? And so that's where I'm starting from. Where are you starting from?
I think we're starting from close to the same place. I believe that, I'm watching, I'm really trying not to immerse myself in the political conversations that are being had at this moment on all of our stations. However, I tune in for short periods of time just to see where the talking points are. And what's been interesting to me is the point you made about being inclusive is a strong one because I can already see the sting of the loss and the projection of people's fears that are now interfering with a healthy dialogue with the other side, the Republican side, to say, first of all, hey, congratulations. Okay, campaign well run, or whether I thought it was well run or not, it definitely resonated, as you mentioned, not with just within the boundaries of the electoral college, but across the nation. So a mandate has been given, right? The mandate for whatever Trump is putting forward as his platform, but also there's a mandate here on something else, and the something else really is where we need to dig in and work. You know, this idea it was a really lovely catch line in Kamala's exit speech, which when she said, and it's been played 1,000 times, so everybody knows it. Now's not the time to throw up our hands, but to roll up our sleeves. And I think that unfortunately, when I first heard it, even I only interpreted it one way. It's time for us as the Dems, as the right-minded people, to stand up, roll up our sleeves, and get to work so we can win next time. And I think that there is a deeper meaning to that. And that is, it's time for us to roll up our sleeves and have real conversation and do real work to bridge the gap, the gulf, the chasm that now exists between the way we think and the way we think. There is something amiss here. We can look at the gender divide, we can look at the racial divide, we can look at the economic divide, and we can also look at what happens within us as a nation when someone spews rhetoric that is, if not blatantly full of hate, certainly the undercurrent and the subtle meanings of which are reflective of that. And what is it about us? You know, during the Biden campaign in the last election, it was the never Trumpers, right? So what was it the never for this campaign? Because there was the mandate that is represented by the amount of votes, the popular votes that were garnered, says never something else. What is that never something else? And then we can point to the obvious things, right? But what's happened to our tent as this party? What's happened to this party's tent? We always said it was big. Is it really? And now that this has turned things on its head, because this course correction cannot happen in 4 years. I don't believe this course correction can happen in 4 years. So we need to begin to think about what's next. And we also have to start thinking, because we don't have a choice, how do we work across the aisle? Sometimes, and I'm going to stop talking about this, but sometimes the whiplash in the knee jerk is so strong that even in our winning, we develop a barrier to being able to have a conversation. I believe we did it as Democrats. And I believe what I'm seeing in the early conversations by the pundits is the same thing. And if this is the way we're going to do what we do, then we will continue to widen the gap and the distance between us. Well, that was a monologue.
So I want to, if we could, sort of bring this down into like the personal level for a minute.
Bring it home. Okay, let's go.
So as a Black man in America,
That's me.
There must be occasion in which, or I guess I should ask it as a question. It's a question and kind of a comment. I got into the elevator in my building. I live in a building that's predominantly Black. And I got in the building on the elevator on Wednesday morning, and there was a Black woman in the elevator, and she said, "Hey, good morning, how are you?" And I said, "I mean, I'm as good as anybody could be today." And she said, "Who are you telling?" I was like, "Yeah, no, I get it." And it made me wonder though, like now do Black folks all look at I mean, you're not a monolith, neither are white people, but sometimes in these occasions we talk about each other like monoliths.
Yeah, yeah.
And so did you wake up on Wednesday and be like, I can't believe all those white people?
Yeah, I woke up and I'm like, as soon as I see Whitey, no, of course not. Of
Well, no,
course
I
not.
mean, yes, that's like maybe, but
No, no, that's not who I am. That's not how I see the world. I'm sure there are people who woke up that way, not me. You speak of monolith, and yeah, what's that?
you
Um,
hear my train?
yeah, I do. So here's the thing. You used the term monolith, and we looked at it. Instantly it brought up black white, right? I think that one of the things we expected, I think we expected monolithic voting. We thought women were going to come out. We thought the black folk were going to come out. We thought these silos of strongholds were going to come forward. And I'm looking at the data that's slowly coming out, and there were a lot of people of color. Um, there clearly it wasn't the gender wave we were expecting, and what happened to the brown vote? Because there was a great, and I should have taken note of his name. There's a book by a gentleman, and he's been exploring the Hispanic vote. He said, "Look, we're seeing that vote as linked to this issue of deportation." He's like 29% of those individuals voting are third generation and have no connection. They're not even thinking about that. They're voting with their pocketbooks. And so we're expecting these monoliths to show up. And I think that was just a miscalculation. So no, I didn't wake up as a black man in America and ask the question, what was wrong with white folk? Looking at the data, I first turned that light on myself and ourselves and said, what's going on with people of color? And maybe it's just wrong to expect anyone to vote because we think it's right because a person of color is running or a certain gender is running.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
of course, when you first see yourself reflected in a candidate, you want to be like, that's my candidate. I struggled with that when Hillary Clinton ran. But sometimes in these elections, it's sort of like, well, you only have two choices, so which are you going to pick? And I know a lot of people chose not to vote at all. And I don't think on this podcast we're going to unpack the demographics of who voted for who, but I do think that some of the most thoughtful stuff I've seen online since the election was around we're not listening. So I sometimes think about these things like on the relational level, like just individual relationships, right? So if someone is mad and I'm not listening to what they're mad about, it makes it really tough to understand their behavior. And we can argue about whether or not Trump will offer solutions to the things that people are upset about. But as you said, if people voted based a lot on their experience of the economy, we have a lot of delusions around what impacts the economy. But I do think that a lot of people are going to be ascribed motivations for their votes that aren't true. So here's an example. If I have a friend in rural Ohio, where I'm from, who has served in the military, who has reported in his or her chain of command to people of color in the military, who's a white guy or girl, who has maybe a kid who is either gay or trans, but who's really struggling economically and doesn't believe, growing up, my dad always used to say, I'm a social liberal, but a fiscal conservative.
Come on.
And when I was younger in my 20s, I had family members who were older than me who said, cousins and stuff, who said, oh, you're a Democrat now, but as you get older, you'll turn Republican. Because what you'll learn is that the social issues are a luxury to consider around when you are really struggling economically. And so I think about, the people I grew up with in high school and people I know still in rural Ohio who don't agree with some of the positions that the Republican Party or the MAGA hats are saying around. See, I shouldn't have even said MAGA hats. I really don't. That's like a dehumanization.
You said it, and I cringed. I got to tell you, I cringed.
Sorry. No, I mean, I didn't. Yeah, it's so easy, right? It's so easy, but because I'm so influenced by social media, but I hear myself. So sorry about that. They're not, they may not agree with Trump's party on social issues. Like they may not be anti-trans, for example. Mm-hmm. But the thing that affects them the most is the gas prices. It's the prices at the grocery store. It is what they feel is like happening with their income and their housing prices and property taxes and all the things that really cost money on a day-to-day basis. And I think some of the social issues that many of us care about, they just affect, I'm not saying this is right, but they affect a smaller percentage of the population than what the economy affects. And I'm not interested in breaking up with my friends in rural Ohio. But it's a really difficult place to be in when there are other people I really love and care about who are trans, or who are worried that marriage equality will get reversed, or who worry about mass deportation and the potential violence that will bring. So it's really very complicated. And I think as humans, our desire is just to boil it down to something really simple that we can just manage. But in interpersonal relationships, if you just decide that people are nuts and you want to walk away from that and set healthy boundaries, I mean, that's tough. I think that's tough. And I feel like the longer we ignore what people are trying to share, is it billions of people who voted?
I don't think it reached billions.
Millions of people who voted. I think if we ignore those people and act like they're just dumb, then I don't know. I think it actually continues to create the anger. I think we messed up a lot of stuff, and I don't think it's as simple as saying people weren't ready to vote for a Black woman. It would just be too simple to say that. And I'm not saying it's not part of the truth. I'm just saying Trump garnered more Black votes this time than before. And so we got to understand that this is more complicated than what we probably just want to boil it down to.
Yeah, you really put a lot out here. I was speaking to one of my friends, African American male, and he says that someone said to him, or a white man said to him, someone he knows he's friends with, said, "Look, the reality is, most white people, and I don't know if he can speak for most white people. Okay, I want to be clear with that, but he said most white people would rather be born poor, uneducated, but white, as opposed to being born Black, educated, and wealthy." Whether he represents.
Wait, so this is just what he thinks?
What he thinks, what he says in his circles. what his circle, his closed conversations are, right? I don't know who he represents or if he represents anyone, but that thought, right, of I'd rather be than is a powerful idea. Did it factor into the results? I don't think it would be the factor, but how much of a factor was it? How much of a factor was the fact that Harris is a woman? How much of the factor was that Harris is a Black woman? And even within my own community, there is this resistance to Black women, right? Black women, even though they have been the backbone of my community for so long, for all the reasons that we do this work because of being shut out as Black men from participation in our economy, it doesn't change the fact that Black women have buoyed this community for so many years. And this internal conflict that we have and this complicated relationship that Black men have with Black women, how much did it factor in? Because I'm hearing Black men talking about, with some disdain in their voice about the fact that she's a woman. In fact, she's a Black woman.
Wait, what about the fact she's married to a white guy?
Doesn't even factor in.
No?
No, I haven't heard anybody say that, right? And I don't want to keep going down that road, but I want to come back to something else you said, and you're absolutely right. Relationships. One of the problems I believe that we're facing in our society in any given situation, whether it be political, whether it be in our corporate structures, on our streets, in our homes, is the lack of the ability to form and to maintain relationships. This is a huge problem. And one of those problems, you also identified this, is how do we talk? How do we communicate? How do we listen? And we're impacted by the fact that what we want in our society today, and I hate to say this because I sound like an old guy. And I don't want to sound like an old guy. I am an old guy, but I don't want to sound like an old guy, but I got to say this. We live in an Instagram, TikTok communication world where I want everything in a soundbite, and I want to believe that I understand the nuance of what you're saying from the soundbite that I listen to. And so I'll give an example. I'm not for or against. I'm not putting that forward. I'm just giving an example. When Trump says, I'm going to levy tariffs, and I'm going to make the Chinese pay, and I'm going to make all these things these people pay us, we hear that soundbite, it makes us feel good, right? Damn, yeah, America's going to stand up and be strong, but we don't unpack it to say, what does that mean in our own economic sphere? How does that impact the dollars that I will have to spend at the dealership, at the grocery store? And so we only can unpack that small portion of it. And this is what we do in all of our lives, right? We don't have the deep conversation. I think part of what we're attempting to do is have a deeper conversation. The question is, our attention spans have been just corrupted. Can we listen? Can we listen?
Well, I even wonder if it's yes and. The skill set required, and I feel like I only am so new, like my skill in this area feels young, nascent.
Fledgling.
Hmm?
Fledgling.
Well, fledgling makes it sound like I don't have a good grasp on it, and maybe I don't. But I think that the emotional intelligence that's required, the self-regulation, the self-awareness, the managing of my emotions, the being able to name my emotions and recognize the physical alerts that I get from my central nervous system to know when I'm starting to feel a reaction in a conversation. Like, we're so crappy at those skills. And we spend so much time trying to avoid feeling certain things that it makes it hard to have deeper conversations. And I think the skill set required just to talk about the election, but also to deal with racial equity conversations in general, which is sort of the subject of our work, but also like interpersonal relationship issues. I mean, when someone hurts my feelings, depending on sort of which emotional age I feel like I am dealing with it from, I'm either defensive or I lash out. The ability to express how you're feeling, to own your own reaction, to have a conversation about what works and what doesn't work in these interpersonal relationships between people. Like that just requires a level of skill. And I think, I don't think we possess enough of it as people. And I think that this is not an individual deficit problem. I think that the systems that we are socialized in make it really tough for us to develop good social emotional competence. And then the result of that, the failure of that, then becomes something that people are made to feel is an individual failing on their part. And we ask them to try to get emotionally healthy inside of emotionally unhealthy systems, right? No? You're just like looking at me. I require a lot of like nonverbal communication. So,
I'm taking it in, and I like what you're saying, and I would say I'm agreeing with 85% of it, right?
well, let's talk about the 15% because that would be
Well,
more.
I'm just you're very my feeling, my emotional connection to what you're saying right now is yes, but I feel like you're being really kind and politically correct. Look, I'm gonna tell you the honest truth. People are fucked up. People don't want to work in their own relationships with their partners, with their children, and we expect them then to come and be leaders and to facilitate some great conversation. It ain't gonna happen. And part of our work, because this is what we've decided to do, is to start with that. You said it. You said the self-awareness, right? That's where I live. That's where I live, right? People aren't aware of their own selves. You said it. People aren't aware of what they feel, of what emotional response is being ginned up inside of them while they're having a conversation. All we do is sit on the edge of our seats, ready to engage the other person, to either disagree with them or to put forward our point without really listening to what they're saying and sitting back and saying, wow, how does that make me feel? And I feel a certain way. Where is that really coming from? Right? I mean, what is that connected to? And if we here's where I become frustrated, Cherise, and here's where I don't know. And I'm sorry to say this, but this is where I feel like our struggle with our work is, because what I think people here are saying is blah 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 blah, emotional feelings, blah blah, right? We want to fix the systemic problem, right, before we even look at where it's coming from. We just want to say, here's a big fix for our society. Sorry, our society is made up of the heart and the liver and the kidney and the endocrine system and all these little systems that if they go offline, we need to deal with them. We need to deal with the fact that we're not self-aware. We need to deal with the fact that we don't know how to talk to each other. And more importantly, don't know how to listen. And that we don't have ownership of our own emotional selves. We stand ready to blame as opposed to own. So I'm sorry, I just rambled and ranted.
No,
and
I
I'm
don't
not
think so. I don't
okay.
think
Well, and I don't think you were off. I just think that you were being very kind.
Well, I guess, part of that is some lived experience too, right? I mean, I have spent some quality time with some narcissists in my life. And the harder you push around the self-awareness piece, I mean, they believe they know themselves. Do you know what I'm saying? So there's a bit of an uphill battle in some relationships where um I can just sort of hear in my mind when you say to some people, you don't know what you're feeling. They're going to disagree with you that they do know what they're feeling. They double down on I mean, to me, in many ways, the hardest part of the self-awareness piece is potentially considering that you may not know yourself as well as you think you do.
I believe that to do that work in order to have people engage, that we cannot say you don't know yourself, and I want you to come in and do this emotional work because you ain't got a grasp on what's happening. No, I think what we say is we don't say anything. We bring people in, and this is part of how I was trained, right? I didn't go in with people telling me I didn't know myself. The fact that I didn't know myself was discovered by participation in the work that we did. And so I don't think we lay down a premise, right? It's just an opportunity to participate in activities, exercises, and work that lead us on a kind of natural progression of understanding that, wow, there are things that I can discover in myself, of myself.
And
And mhm.
sorry,
No.
the thing that you're bringing up for me is like something, you have to have something at stake. I mean, there has to be a reason to participate. I know for you, I know for me, that participation in any kind of program or training or therapy where I was willing to do some internal work, it's because I wanted something I didn't have. I had a goal or I had a desire to have a life that looked a certain way, and I didn't have a life that looked that way. And I really wanted to understand how to achieve what I wanted to achieve.
And
And
I'm gonna pause you there because I'm gonna say yes and because that's our thing. We get yes and. Um, if I'm sitting in the dark and I am unaware that there is light, and I don't even necessarily want to see light because I don't know light exists, and someone turns the light on, I see it. And what that analogy is to say, and that might be a weak analogy, but that analogy is to say, if we sit down, right, and I don't know what gets us to the table to sit down, but if we sit down and the work begins, people can become aware whether they have come to do the work or not. Now, certainly someone who's come eager to work on self can progress along that continuum much quicker with much more awareness. But we cannot sit in the presence of change and not be changed, right? To some degree. So the greater question for me in keeping what you were talking about is how do we freaking get people to sit down at all? Because when DEI was like a mandated thing and you had to go sit down, that was a prime opportunity to present things in a way that people could have said, wow, you know? But I don't think that's the way it was presented. I think it was presented in a way where people were like, I would just want to get the hell out of here. Some people. What I believe is that we may have missed a grand opportunity early in the years of this. So our question is now, if it's not going to be mandated for people to sit down, the people who want to do the work will sit down, but the people who just, I don't need to do any work won't. How do we get everyone, not everyone, but multiple types of people at a table at the same time to do the work?
well, this is a really good question because when I started talking with people about wanting to kind of put this organization together and to continue to work on my own journey and to support people who looked like me, who worked in spaces like me, my personal thing, right? The criminal legal reform space and all of us well-meaning white people in that space. When I talked about wanting to do that, I did get questions about, how will you bring people to the table who don't want to be at the table? And the only analogy or the only life experience I could use was talking about, well, I've spent my career, especially the last 15 or 20 years, talking about pretrial injustice, right? Bail reform in America. I would go to jurisdictions where, this is my favorite story. I was invited in by a county commissioner in Arkansas to come to the Capitol during a time in which all county commissioners from across Arkansas would be at this annual meeting. And he asked me to come and do a talk on bail reform and how Arkansas could get better at upholding the presumption of innocence, not incarcerating people because they were too poor to post bond. You might imagine that that room was mainly filled with white men, county commissioners across Arkansas. It's like 10 years ago. I start my conversation. There may be 300 people in the room, Kelton. I start my conversation at the first, this is like a 3-hour thing. At the first break, about a third of the people got up and left.
Ooh.
They were seated mostly in the front, and they left. I come back after the break. Now there's only 2/3 of the room left. This is a huge room, but now people are even farther away from me, right? So 2/3 of the room. So now I'm walking in the aisle, like down toward where the people are, because I feel really lonely and I'm embarrassed. I'm just embarrassed that this is happening and I don't really know. And I'm younger, and this is a couple of years into doing this work, and I'm just unaccustomed to this. We take another break. You know where this is going. We take another break, and the second third of the room is gone. They leave. They don't come back. Now there are maybe 75 people left. They are so far away from me in the back of the room. So I do that thing where I'm like, do you guys want to move up? You can move up. So they don't. It was a pretty hostile crowd, and people did not want to hear what I had to say about anything. Now, let's talk about all the reasons that could have been. I'm this white woman from the East Coast. I don't know anything about Arkansas. I don't know the struggles of the people in Arkansas. My refrain around we over-incarcerate people at the pretrial stage, this disproportionately impacts people of color, all the facts, right, that are true. Maybe that's what people in Arkansas were hoping would be the true. Let's over-incarcerate people of color and poor people at the pretrial stage. It helps them take a plea, forces them to take a plea. This is just how we keep the wheels of this machine running. But the notion of forcing people to sit at a table is hard. And what I learned from that very valuable lesson is, wow, maybe I should have asked a lot of questions in that space before I said a word about what are they struggling with respect to bail and pretrial. And if they said nothing, we're not struggling with anything, we're perfectly happy. Our jails are filled with people who are pending trial. You come back when people are ready, right? You come back when people are ready. And I learned later in my career just to say things like, or ask questions around what are the value systems that you have, right? And almost everybody will tell you they believe in fairness and they want a fair shot for themselves and their kids. They want opportunity. In many ways, we care about a lot of the same things. We just have very different perspectives on what is either promoting or inhibiting the realization of the things that we care about. This is a long answer, but I really don't like, when people ask me like, well, you can't make people aren't going to want to do what you want them to do. I'd be like, that's fine. They don't have to. But to the extent that people want things that that are important to them, and they're trying to understand how to make those things happen, just at least understanding that there might be something to learn about the world that you didn't know that would support you. I feel like is useful, but I'm not trying to make anybody do anything. I don't think you can make people do anything.
Well, we can't. And I think that also the band in which we work is too narrow. I think that part of what I believe
Wait,
is that,
I don't understand what that meant. The band we work in
so,
is too narrow.
yeah, so you know, if we look and say what are our objectives in the work that we're doing, right? We set up the parameters. That's the bandwidth that we're working in, and that's usually structured around outcomes, right? Expected or desired outcomes. And I think that band has to be widened. That idea has to be stretched. So what I'm looking at is saying, okay, as you ask the question, what are your struggles? But not just what are your struggles in this work you're doing. What makes life easier for you, right? We all want a better work environment. We all want to be able to be heard or seen, ideas put forward. So I believe if we start there and begin to, a word I never used, delve into, then turn that light into like, okay, so to achieve those things, which have nothing to do with, I'll take your case, the incarceration and putting people away on bail. What we're asking really is how do we make the work you do, right, work that feels more meaningful to you, right? And with that, begin to look at awareness, ownership, responsibility, biases, right? Because you can deal with bias just within the community of people that are working together, right? Um, One attorney went to a very prestigious school, another attorney, came to community college. I don't know. And you're like, okay, so what happens within your own environment? How do you see the people you work with? And I think that is a way to start. And I think that I'm using that example you use for some, but I'm looking at any environment. Maybe it's not to put forward, as you said, what we hope the outcomes to be, but finding people and trying to meet them what they are, with their immediate, what do you need most, right? And then trying to help them in that space and build out. I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy. Tell me what you think.
Well, I feel like the work we're trying to do is a combination of, yes, supporting healthier workplaces. I know both of us have worked in toxic workplaces before. It's possible that places where I have worked, people might have thought it was toxic because of me. And we spend so much of our life in workplaces. And so that's why, for me, at least, I really think a lot about the workplace environment. And maybe because I come from the sector I come from, that disconnect between what we espouse as our external values as an organization, juxtaposed with how we treat people inside the organization, that is a real problem in nonprofit sector. You have a civil rights organization where, the founder or the president is charged with sexual harassment. It's like, wait, what? Right? But so I care about workplaces for sure, but it's more than just that interpersonal relationship. I think because I've lived through the struggle for marriage equality, whatever your opinions are on same-sex marriage, there have been history, there's been sort of deconstructing or debriefing kind of the march towards marriage equality and the strategies used to accomplish getting the Supreme Court, to hear a case that would rule on this, and the strategy struggle between, do we go in through the hearts and minds door, right? Like trying to reduce the discriminatory beliefs that people have around gay people. That's sort of the same thing as like this stereotype or bias against people of color. Like, do you want everybody to just make a friend and then have a different opinion about someone of any sort of identity that's not sort of part of the white cisgender male heterosexual identity. The strategy was, do you make everybody okay with gay people, or do you fight for the policy change that says, I don't care, you can still feel about me however you want to feel about me, but just don't let that be the thing that drives the law. And at some point, marriage equality, it's like the chicken and the egg. Which comes first? Do people feel a certain way and then change the laws? Or do people change the laws and then the people who don't feel a certain way, just it doesn't impact, it doesn't prevent someone from exercising their rights. I think that the work we're trying to do with organizations is to not just support healthy, thriving environments in which everyone feels like they belong, which has to include people who feel a way that you don't agree with. But we're also trying to say, let's look at the policies and practices of the organization. And even if everyone loves each other, yet there's this incredible hierarchy within the organization where the people at the top who make the most money still get the most benefits, and the people who make the least amount of money get the least benefits. I always think about, if I'm making a couple $100,000 a year running an organization and I get free parking, but the person on my team who makes $70,000 a year has to pay for parking, like, that's just the way it's always been, right? The higher you ascend, the more benefits you get. But honestly, the least benefits, you said to me, we were talking once about car loans, right? And I was like, yeah, man, I mean, with my credit score, I got a car loan for like 0.0%. I don't need a car loan for 0.0%. I can afford a car loan for 8%. Maybe I wouldn't want to pay it, but I could still afford it, right?
Yeah.
And so we just reward, the reward structure is now, some people would say, well, that's because you've always paid your bills on time and you've never like had to default on anything. And so you're less risky than someone who, but I continue to be less risky because I keep getting a benefit. Right. So I know this is like super windy, but I do think it's an important thing for us to continue to talk about, is that we're not just talking about coming into organizations and supporting people and treating each other better. Of course we are. But we're also coming into organizations and saying, your struggles in this workplace may not be exactly what you think they are. And the goal is to support the organization's growth and development, to accomplishing the goals of that organization, and at this both internally and externally. And that requires not just interpersonal work. Like, that's first order level of change, is like between you and me. That second level order change is like, how are the policies and practices of this organization supporting diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, and belonging for everyone? Sometimes people hear that as like, hey, white person, you've gotten all these benefits for so long, so now we're going to affirmative action all the other benefits, we're going to elevate. And for decades, folks have been saying that is not the way to win equity, because the vast majority of white people, while they have skin privilege, yes, they do not experience the level of economic benefit across the board that white people get accused of having, right? Most white people I know are not wealthy. They're not. They're struggling. And ignoring that, I think, is how Trump, like, it's how the Democrats lost. Like, acting like everything is okay all the time and we're going to be fine is like gaslighting to people who are really struggling.
It is gaslighting. However, and because I don't think this just falls on racial lines, I believe that there are two things. So much here, and we have what, 9 minutes. A couple of things. One, and it's been proven, and I wish we had prepped for this because I'd have like references. But what we know, what we know is that our memories do not serve us well. They don't. We remember through a lens that is shaded and corrupted by our past experiences. And so we were talking about, this idea of kind of coming back to the political thing. How did this happen? I believe that, first of all, people look back on things and see them as they wanted them to be. Not saying there aren't elements of truth there, but as they want them to be, as opposed to how they really were. Um, I gotta look at my notes because you said some things. And I don't know where they are, so now I'm kind of lost. But
No, but what do you think that people are reflecting back on and their memories are not serving them with? Like that things used to be better, or
I mean, that was a big part of the campaign. A big part of the campaign was, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? And when you look statistically, crime is down. A lot of things that are being said aren't, they actually are.
Yeah.
And when you compare them to that period of time, no, they weren't that great. And there was a lot of things that needed to be fixed even then. But our memories allow us to see something different. And so, even as we talk to people in their environments where we're hoping to facilitate change and awareness, people look at their lives and where they are through a lens that is not accurate. And so what we're saying is, we want you to see where you really are. We want you to see how things really are. I know where I wanted to go. So we talked about doing the work. There's the part of the work that we need to do because, and I'm just going to be extreme just for the point of it. We want young Black men to stop getting gunned down in the street by police officers. Okay. And then there is, we want our civil servants to see the humanity in everyone they serve, right? So do this interpersonal work, or do we stop this killing? And I think that you're absolutely right. When faced with that, we have to stop this, right? And I don't know, and I think this is the place where we, as this entity, are going to really be trying to find how to walk that line between these two elements, right? And what does it take to address, in more subtle ways, both of those things? That's our challenge, right? Because we walk into certain environments, and yeah, when we're looking at your policies and procedures, there's some really challenging things here that we need to deal with, and we really need to humanize the work that you're doing. So, my question to you, not to be answered, but to be considered, I mean, you can give me an answer, is how do we walk that tightrope? Or are you and I saying, we're not really sure, but that's what our goal is to find out. We want to explore that space where people really don't get into. That space that's kind of iffy, that's kind of I don't know-ish, right? That we don't like to be in because we like to know. We want to walk into, like you did, into that organization and have some statistics and have some knowledge that you can bring that's going to bring about change. But really, we're in this kind of muddy area that we don't know.
Yeah, I don't even know if I understand the question.
But I
But
don't know if I understand it either.
no, it's okay. I mean, I'll just leave it. Why don't I just sit with it? I'll just sit with the question. how do you think that, okay, we have the election results now. We're going to have 4 years of Trump. How do you think this is going to impact us over the
That's a
next
great,
few years with this stuff that we're trying to do?
that's a great question. It brings me back to something I wanted to say at the top of the hour. I've always wanted to say that, by the way, at the top of the hour, which was, in the work that I've done, there's an understanding that the fear of something is oftentimes greater than the thing itself. We're facing the unknown. A lot was said, which then really put our fantasies into hyperdrive. And I'm listening to some of the liberal pundits, and they are taking what was said and they are projecting it out into the future, into almost an apocalyptic modality, right? And I'm like, okay, yeah, that could be the case, but maybe it isn't. I mean, we thought it was the end of the world in the first Trump term, and somehow we survived. So I don't know. I mean, we all understand the guardrails are down, blah, blah, blah. Well, all right. But I still believe that the fear of the thing is greater. Now, to your question, which I'll ask you to repeat because I went on that tangent and don't remember the question.
Well, what do you think the impact of Trump having been elected will mean for the work that we're trying to do? And we're not, just to be clear, Kelton, and just to be clear to the listener, like, you and I are two little peons. We're like dots. We're like a grain of sand on an infinite beach, right? Like, we don't pretend like we are here to like revolutionize the way people think about DEIA, or we're not here to save the world. Like, all I want to do is be available for conversation that supports people in doing what's important to them and having their values sort of all aligned, right? And being able to work in healthy workplaces. And I'll have those conversations with anybody who wants to have them.
Yeah, yeah. And I'll push back on you a little bit because I am trying to save the world. I am the savior.
God, yeah, okay, you honestly, we ought to talk sometime. Put this in your notes.
Okay.
What does growing up like in a religious environment in which your father is this giant, larger than life person in your religious community, and how does religion make you think that you once said I was on like a righteous journey? Like, I'm just fascinated, but that's like a sidebar. But
yeah, it is a sidebar. But religion came up very heavily in my text groups around the country. There was a lot of religion, right? And I had to back off because I was getting ready to get into waters that was going to upset people, and it just wasn't the time. But yeah, we'll do that at another time. Look, how is it going to impact? How do I feel it will impact my community as Black folk? I think that a big part of it is going to be a lot of blaming and finger pointing. I think that there initially within this in the aftermath of this, I think there's going to be blaming, finger pointing. I think there are going to be some divisions, right? And Black men didn't show up, and that's going to be a theme for a minute, right? That Black men didn't show up, and that is a societal thing. Black men don't show up, right? So I think there's going to be some reckoning that has to happen within my community. What I wish, what I hope for, what I would like to see happen is everybody take a deep breath and say, you know what, there's a bunch of stuff that happened and all that stuff could be true, but where do we go from here? I don't know if we can do that, Cherise. I don't know if we can do that within our own communities, meaning as Black folk, as white folk, as Hispanic folk. I don't know if we can do it as a collective community. And so, I really think the next 4 years, maybe even 8 to 12, are just going to be some walking around and bumping into each other awkwardly until we find a way to have a conversation.
Yeah, I think the last thing I'll say is that when you have half the country, a little more than half the country, I realize it's not the entire country because not every single person voted, but when you have over half the people who voted one way and you have the other half, it really is, to me, like, I just always try to boil everything down to, it feels like now we need to go to marriage therapy, right? Like,
Without a doubt.
We are in a house where one person thinks one way and the other person thinks the other way. And if we just act like the other person is an idiot, which many of us have done in our lives in relationships, then you get divorced and you go on with your life. But like, it doesn't solve anything. And you bring all of those issues with you into the next space you go. And I think that it behooves us to try to figure out, all right, why did this happen? How did this happen? And instead of just saying the other side is a bunch of idiots, we ought to really unpack what were the things that really mattered. And because I'm not trying to solve the electorate, but this shit is going to show up inside people's workplaces.
Inside people's homes.
What?
Inside people's homes.
Inside people's homes, but we don't go in people's homes as an organization. We go into organizations as an organization. And so there's a reality to this, that this is going to have an impact, and I want it to help make things better, not make things worse. In some ways, the Democrats losing helps these issues be more front and center, because sometimes what we liberal elites like to do is like, we are so politically correct, or we are just like everything is fine, or we do think that there are, it makes it harder to talk about and face some of the issues. And at least now it does feel like, well, we have stuff to talk about, and it's going to keep coming up on the, the rhetoric that will be front and center. So people are like,
and there may be opportunity. There may be opportunity here, right? There could be organizations, entities that say, hey, this has really brought up some really challenging things for us in our workplace. Yeah. And can you come in and help? And certainly we want to avail ourselves to that. We want to be available for people to come in and to help do that work. So, I mean, there could be some real opportunities that come, and I don't mean just opportunities for us as a little group, but I'm saying opportunities for open discussion and work to be done. Yeah. Inside of places where people have to work it out in order for the organization to be successful.
That's right. All right. Well, thanks for joining me this morning.
Oh yeah, thank you. And I think that we need to consider, is this a part 1 and part 2 episode? I feel like we scratched so much, and maybe there's an opportunity to talk a little deeper and see how things develop over the next week or two, and maybe we come back and revisit this.
All right, you got it.
All right. All right. Well, I will see you later.
I'll see you later.
See you later.
Bye.